Welcome to the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, where we explore the impact of EdTech on the student experience with engaging, fun, and relevant conversations that honor the wide range of work happening all across the higher ed ecosystem. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell. I've been working in and around higher ed for the past decade, focused on student support and digital experience. Join me every week for discussions with some of the best minds in education technology who will be bringing you their perspectives on how digital transformation is reshaping the way we recruit, engage, and graduate learners. You'll hear firsthand accounts of how institutional leaders are developing their strategy, as well as get deeper on the stories of how these EdTech tools are being built to foster better student outcomes. With that, let's get to today's episode. Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another bonus live episode of the Higher Ed Geek Podcast, recorded here at South by Southwest EDU in Austin. This is our final interview of day 2 of the conference, our first day doing interviews, but we are, coming up against the end of this full day of interviews and sessions and, all the things that people do here. But we are joined by Ashley. If you want to briefly introduce yourself and your background, and then we'll get more into the work that your organization, Lemnis, does.
Hi there. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Ashley Beckner, Managing Director of the Lemnis Collective, which we'll talk a bit more about. I've been an operator and an investor in education for nearly the entire course of my career, a couple of decades, and excited to bring those experiences here to Lemnis for the past year.
Awesome. Yeah. And I guess, if you want to explain a little bit about the work Lemnis does, and I guess through that, what problem are you trying to solve through your philanthropy?
Yeah. So Lemnis is a public charity formed out of the proceeds of the sale of a very large K-12 assessment provider in 2023. And we are focused on the future of the unlimited learner. So recognizing that we're in a time of really dramatic change and finding ways to help learners thrive under those conditions of dramatic change. We do that through several ways of providing capital, the biggest one being the one that I lead, our collective. We are partnering with both for-profit and nonprofit organizations to merge or acquire them wholly into the Lemnis umbrella, really looking at engaging in deep partnership with organizations that are having a real impact, but maybe at this point of growth or inflection where they need new capital to unlock the next stage of that growth and impact. We also provide grant capital and make investments in organizations to complement our work on the collective.
Gotcha. And I guess, sort of a context too, I feel like I've observed, and not super, partially why I wanted to have this conversation with you, and you were super game to just kind of jump in last minute ad hoc here. So thank you for that.
Absolutely.
Is that idea of I've not been super plugged into the funding investment world and how all that capital flows or whatever else. But, sometimes with anything, it's if I'm hearing about it, it probably is pretty noteworthy news. So the idea, I know that there's been kind of a chilling or, kind of pretty dramatic reduction from the, how they call irrational exuberance of the pandemic years of a lot of, money flowing to ed tech companies that were sort of working in that space. I guess I'm wondering that idea of entering into a period of relatively quieter, slower sort of investment and all that. Because I'd imagine, that idea of if an organization's at a certain point, that idea of what you are able to do to kind of help them move along and maybe kind of join the collective to kind of reach greater heights in partnership with other organizations. So just anything around that, I guess, of why now and the way that you're doing it, that sort of broader context, and then we'll kind of dig a little bit more, deeper and specific into your work.
Yeah, certainly. In terms of it being a time of dramatic change for learners, I think it's also a time of change for capital flows into education. We're just seeing a lot of disruption, a lot of change, things happening at the policy level, funding flows from the government. And to your point, I think you used the word exuberance. There was definitely a level of exuberance in the early 2020s about what was possible here. And I think that excitement very much warranted in terms of the impact that these companies and organizations could have on learners, but potentially a mismatch in expectations for what the education market can support in terms of pace of growth. And so that's why I think it's a very nice time for Lemnis's capital to be able to look out at the landscape and say, there are really great solutions out there. There is demonstrated impact on learners, and these companies, these organizations need the opportunity to continue to grow and prove what's possible, perhaps at a different pace than they may have been expected to historically. And we want to give them that kind of stable landing place to be able to continue to build on the great work that they've started.
Yeah. And I guess it's like, because sometimes you see these like private equity, like sort of spin ups of different companies and stuff like that, where they do maybe want them to kind of work better together. But other times, sometimes it's just like, oh, this company, was valuable enough or appealing enough to them, but it's just another, file away in this sort of their like, kind of repository of investments and acquisitions that we made. So I'm getting the impression, that it's more in the camp of that idea of like kind of bringing things together to have them cooperate and, kind of create a network effect there. So to kind of keep talking about, the Lemnis Collective, sort of your approach and like how it actually works.
Yeah, so we are looking for organizations, again, that are more mature. I tend to typically talk to companies or organizations that have been around often over 10 years. They're north of 10 million in revenue, and they've established themselves, but they are looking at what's next and looking for a place and for capital where they can continue to grow what's next. I think you really hit the nail on the head in terms of what we're trying to do with bringing the organizations into the collective and saying not only how can we provide that landing place for you to have the stability to continue to grow, but also how do you want to evolve? How do you want to look at the landscape that's out ahead of us, this future that's coming at us rapidly, and build what's next, and then build that in partnership with those that are around you. So we're in the early days in terms of what we're bringing in, but I would say over the course of the next 18 to 24 months, we'll have more of a set of organizations in place to look at those opportunities to build greater collaboration and greater impact as a part of that collective. Yeah,
that's good to hear. Yeah, I guess at this juncture, in time and space, and recording this in March of 2026, in case folks are listening to it at a different point, that sort of intentionality to kind of the approach of who you're bringing together. But so far, and this is kind of, I guess, news to me, and maybe kind of inaugurating it and celebrating it more now. Inside Track, which we love here, we've talked to folks from their team, and I've known of them for a long time, was acquired to join the collective. So just talk more about that decision, I guess, and it being, I guess, an indicative example of what you kind of framed in terms of your intentions with the collective.
Yeah, we are very excited to have Inside Track be the first partner in the Lemnis Collective. And as we think about the future that unlimited learner needs to thrive, there's several kind of key things that we're thinking about, really building a foundation of belonging and holistic supports for learners to be able to build upon. The next layer, building durable skills. So what are those skills that we are all going to need that are less subject to automation in a future of automation? And then how do we take all of that and connect it to a career opportunity that enables learners to thrive over the long term? And so when we looked at Inside Track, really they support learners across that entire spectrum that I just outlined, and perhaps most importantly, with that foundation of belonging. So we know from research that at all ages, learners really need access to one trusted adult to feel safe and to belong. And as Inside Track would say, everybody deserves a coach. And so we really looked at them as one of these key partners to say, how do we provide those holistic supports that learners are going to need to thrive in that uncertain future?
Yeah, I think they're like the gold or platinum standard when it comes to that kind of work of coaching and everything. So I, like, way back in the day, they trained me as a coach at a, they were sort of external partner that came in to coach coaches, and like that sort of thing. So we always had like a lot of respect for them even way back then, and kind of following their work and their commitment to all that. I think, yeah, it's a great kind of harbinger, I think, of that idea of like, how do you really support today's learners kind of across the spectrum. It is that idea of kind of a, making sure that there's the kind of that high touch, because I know there's a lot of institutions uplifting the like community ASAP model, like they're sort of like, the success that they found with that has been, just increasingly replicated, just as kind of a best practice when it comes to that. And it is, stands as a testament again to the value of, everybody deserving a coach, because that's that person who reaches out, who checks in, who, can be kind of the multi-purpose tool, that sort of thing. And then, just imagining, just with what you said, like the potential, the opportunity of like bringing in other folks to the collective that could empower that work in, many forms and shapes and ththings, or, how they could help other institutions kind of implement, like they would have the delivery mechanism, maybe, like through coaches or whatever else, so, I'm just getting very excited about all the, the ideas and the potential and everything. So I think it's a really great move. And I guess just sort of like, the core sentiment of what you all are doing, this philanthropy, it playing a role in supporting higher ed, like what is kind of your philosophy on that? Because I think it is that idea of like there, is I guess a variety of approaches, to, how in the US, like, are we kind of, supporting and sustaining higher education and all of that. So what role do you feel philanthropy should play when it comes to supporting higher ed?
I think philanthropy has a myriad of roles, and I think it's very important that different funders identify who they want to be, who they're best suited to be, and then show up and deliver against where they're best suited to do that. And so Lemnis, given our operating history as NWA and our leadership team and our board's particular experience there, they felt best suited to say, we can continue to support these organizations in an operational way, to invest in their growth, to invest in their development, and really be those deep partners. And we know we can't do it alone. So we are also looking to the other funders that have specific priorities around a specific region, or have specific priorities around community colleges, who can also partner with the organizations that we bring into the collective to help spread solutions like Inside Track further and faster with that additional funding support that's more targeted and tailored to their priorities.
Yeah, and I guess it is even just sort of a spiritual kind of thing, that idea of like, philanthropy, people like donating, or whatever it might be, because obviously it's like, in so many words or whatever, the idea of like, we pay taxes to the state and federal government and then they invest it in education, whatever. It's like, that sort of being this kind of like thing kind of happening just sort of like continuously or whatever, but it is sort of like, oh, I'm like donating to education, whatever, versus it being like, I'm literally like taking an action to opt in to, donate and support education. But I think it's just so many things where like, there's sometimes a gap or a failure in like, the private, the kind of capitalist economy and those sort of things. So if it's sort of like, we can kind of, keep scaffolding, high quality education to be as, accessible and affordable and accountable and supportive to as many folks as possible. I think it is that idea of like, there is just going to be such a great net benefit on that, kind of investment, and just the idea of it's sort of, public good or whatever, like, I don't know, I guess I'm waxing very poetic in the idea of like, how are we putting capital towards, any of this stuff, wherever the funds might come from, of like, just, we can't kind of just clearly, like, we're at, I think, that breaking point of like, that threshold of people's kind of tolerance of, super high kind of sticker prices for institutions, and then, massive amounts of student debt and whatever else. It's like, something's got to give here. And even just, that idea of like, we wouldn't want to just maintain the status quo when it comes to those sort of things. We'd want people to be able to, again, just access a supportive, engaging, higher education environment, whatever it is, whatever institution, whatever programs, whatever modality, those sort of things. So sort of head in the sky kind of like point of view on this, because I guess like it is the idea of like, it's going to take a lot of people and a lot of like, various sort of funding sources or whatever else to kind of, keep moving everything in the right direction. So I don't know if that's like part of it, I guess, like from your point of view of maybe some of the companies that you might sort of like build a collective with, that idea of like where they're at, what they're doing, whatever else. It's like, yeah, they wouldn't be some like venture capital invested, like, growth at all costs kind of like companies or whatever, but they are doing important, impactful work. So if you can sort of bring them together in a different, unique way, they can continue doing their work and have the resources they need to do that in just a different structure or environment. Like,
yeah, that's absolutely the plan. And I don't think we have time today to unpack all of the challenges in our education system and the funding models that it's built upon. And we are certainly thinking about all of those challenges and what our longer term opportunities are to drive systems change, how we leverage the multiple types of capital in our portfolio to drive shifts in systems, to drive shifts in policy. But our focus first and foremost is on bringing these organizations into the collective and then building in partnership with them and other funders, other partners, other types of capital around the table. Because as I think you said, like, no individual organization is going to fix all of these challenges by themselves. We have to work together and we have to be stronger together, which is one of the foundational premises of why we bring these organizations together in the collective. Yeah.
And I guess clearly I'm at the end of a day of a bunch of podcast interviews. I've just got all this stuff sort of like jumbling around in my brain and just,
I love it.
Yeah. Like great conversations about,
love
all
to
this,
hear it. Love to hear it.
Yeah, again, like head in the sky, kind of just like, the work and it being important and all the things we got to solve and everybody coming together and working together. But
we have to take it one step at a time, right?
Exactly.
And we can get lost in how big the problems are, but which I do often. And I also love watching Inside Track's videos about their learners and how their learners are impacted by their coaches, and really grounding myself in the importance of impacting individual learners and individual lives while we are simultaneously striving to change systems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So we have a few minutes left. We'll end on our final question. We're asking everybody, we've covered a lot, big issues, but, we're starting somewhere and, continuing the, important work here of, just delivering better for learners, for society and everything else. So with all that we've covered, with all that you've shared, what final bit of advice would you like to share for other higher ed leaders navigating this moment?
I think I'll come back to what I just said before, which is being able to hold together in tension how big the challenges are that we're navigating right now, and I know everyone's out there doing it, right? Especially educators, waking up every morning and taking it one step at a time and looking at the lives in front of you that you have the opportunity to impact, and just thinking about how that all connects to the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think it, like certain things like bear repeating, circle, bold, underline, like all that stuff. And because, I think there's just like that acknowledgement of like, on one side, like the change management, things just constantly sort of being in flux and kind of just honoring that. But then, the kind of longitudinal, the sort of deep commitment and hard work that it takes, to change systems and everything, and acknowledging kind of the frustrations of folks like living through it, but then also like, honoring the hard work that so many people put in to kind of, keep moving things forward. And, it's always great to be here, in community with all those great folks that are doing that work and, trying to continue further that work itself and be kind of motivated and inspired and all that great stuff. So again, thank you for kind of just jumping in quickly, sharing all that you did, a lot of great insights and some, noteworthy news about kind of your all's work, but we'll have ways to connect with you and Lemnis in the episode description. And just thanks for hanging out.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Higher Ed Geek podcast. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow. So be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and content drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.